Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And we are back here with Dr. Robert Shaw to talk about, well, all the different ways he can help you as a preacher, as an author, as a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and so much more. Welcome back to the show today. How are you?
Hello, Jill. Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Well, please introduce yourself to our listeners. Give us specifically a little bit about yourself. New listeners each and every time we speak. So I just want to make sure they get to know you as well.
Yes. Again, my name is Dr. Robert Shaw. I'm originally from the New York, New Jersey area. I currently live in North Carolina. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor in both North Carolina and Virginia. I'm an author of 6 books regarding and related to human core longings and how we meet those and how we try to meet those without the proper way of doing it, which gets us in trouble. I'm also a university professor teaching graduate level future counselors. And I travel around quite a bit and do conferences and seminars, either at churches or organizations and groups, just discussing things that relate to the human condition and how we can relate better to each other, how we can communicate with each other better, and just being aware of some things that we go through where people can be hurting and we just don't know it.
Beautiful. It's rbshaw.net. That's rbshaw.net. That's his website. You can reach out to him there. And also today, as we continue the discussion, we're going to open up the phone lines. If anyone does have any questions in regards to anything he's speaking of or anything about him, please feel free to give us a call. 631-317-1291. That's 631-317-1291. All right, Dr. Shaw, what did you have in mind for us today?
Good question. I would like to kind of segue into something from our last time together. We spent much of the last time together talking about grief and how as a society and as a culture, we as Americans don't, or even Western Europeans, don't grieve very well. Mm-hmm. And in religious backgrounds too, Christianity does not have a template from which to grieve or to honor and respect those who are in mourning, whereas many other religions do, and we touched on that. What I'd like to kind of segue from there is into what I feel are the 5 major issues that most people deal with who are struggling in mental health areas. We have a book called the DSM-5, which is a book that is a diagnostic book from which we diagnose mental health conditions based upon symptoms and criteria. Back in the 1970s, the book was about this thick. Now it's about this thick. And there's a lot of overlap in it. But what I have found, we deal basically with 5 major areas that people struggle with. They are trauma, depression, anxiety, anger, and addictions. Mm-hmm. Now, some of those are interrelated, or how we would call it, they're comorbid. They're comorbid, meaning that they can be linked and have an individual can have more than one of those things going on at the same time. But those are the 5 major areas that a lot of the other criteria and a lot of the other diagnoses really fall under. And I'd like to kind of touch on those 5 today and spend a little bit of time on at least 1 or 2 of them, and maybe our next couple of sessions spend time on the remaining, 2 or 3. If that's okay with you.
Absolutely is. And again, 631-317-1291. We'll open up the line, 631-317-1291.
I guess the way to start off would be a little bit of a basic definition of these 5 things that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Depression, for example. Basically, especially because we've discussed the last time about grief. Depression is unresolved grief. Grief that lingers, grief that people are not addressing, that they are not processing. Mm-hmm. And that can go on for months and many times for years. So unprocessed grief doesn't go away. And as I mentioned last time, we are only haunted by what's in darkness. Whatever we hold on to, whatever we stuff and repress, will still be there. But when we bring it into the light, 2 things happen. We begin to see it for what it is, and it begins to lose its power. And I can't take credit for this statement. I can't remember who actually coined it, but it was said, you can never bury emotions dead. You bury them alive.
Mm.
So in our attempts to repress, in our attempts to ignore, in our attempts to stuff our feelings, we don't, and oftentimes when we try to do that, we think that by doing it, they go away. That's not the case. We stuff them, but we bury them alive, and they still have an effect on us. So for example, depression, again, unresolved grief, the natural emotional response to loss, any loss. So similar to the definition of grief that we talked about last time, it's a key word being natural. We are okay to grieve. When we lose something, when we experience a loss of any kind, it's a natural expression to grieve. We tend to not treat it naturally. We tend to treat it as if it's a weakness, as if it's something that should not happen. If that's how we're thinking, if that's what we've been communicated to about it, we are going to be in trouble. Anger. Anger is an emotional, it's the emotion of a frustrated goal to be loved. And as I mentioned, I think one other time, love is a two-way emotion. It's a two-way street. What usually devastates, so what we usually think about love is if we don't receive the love that we need as we are going through our developmental stages, or even as an adult, we feel it. If we don't feel the love or we don't receive the love that we all need and crave, it can be devastating. But the fact that it's a two-way street, we also tend to overlook this part. If, however, we are trying to express love in whatever way, whether it be affection or serving one another or being good to one another, and it gets rejected, that can be just as devastating, to have what we offer to be rejected. So anger is a frustrated goal to be loved or to express love and have it rejected. I like to use the word, I like to have add a definition saying it's an emotional call to action for a real or perceived injustice. And what I mean by that, if something is not right, we want to do something about it. And if we feel hampered or handcuffed and not able to do something about a wrong, we're going to feel angry. Either a wrong that's been done to us or even a wrong that's been done to a loved one or somebody around us. So anger is an emotion that needs to have an action to it. If it doesn't have an action to it, a lot of anger turns into depression, because sometimes depression has been defined as anger turned inward. Again, anger has to have a place to go. And if we don't have a place for it to go, we turn it on ourselves a lot of times. And that can also lead to depression. The third one is anxiety. Anxiety, again, is a simple way to look at it, is the fear that love, abundance, or competence is in limited supply. In the vernacular, it means when we feel anxious, it's that because we're not loved enough, we don't have enough, or we are not enough to measure up, to do what's necessary. So we are either not loved enough, we don't have enough, or we don't feel like we are enough. And when those types of things we experience, then we're going to feel anxious. The next one is trauma. Trauma is something that overwhelms a person's normal adapting or coping skills. Something that occurs to us that absolutely overwhelms our natural ability to adapt or to overcome. It lingers oftentimes, a traumatic event, and influences a person's life. It can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. It could lead to addictions, because trauma actually shakes a person to the core. Whatever traumatic event happens, depending on the level of it, whether it be a sexual assault, whether it be someone very close to us dying, a car accident, those who I've worked with in the military for many years, traumatic events when they experience combat and what goes on in those environments. It overwhelms our natural capacity to deal with that thing in our coping skills. And then the last one is addictions. Addictions can be simply defined as a behavior or a substance that has eventually controlled our lives. Now, in all of these put together, there's also a component that's very physical about these things. It's not just mental health. Every human being, no matter what culture we're from, no matter what gender.
Stand by, we have a call coming in. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Hello, welcome to the show. You're live on the line with Dr. Robert Shaw, who's calling.
Hi, my name is Sabrina.
Hi, Sabrina. Please say hello, Dr. Shaw. Sabrina's on the line. Ask
hello,
any
Sabrina.
questions you may have. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Shaw. My name is Sabrina.
Yes,
and
Sabrina.
I'm calling because I want to know, like, how would you describe your approach to, like, counseling? Because, like, do you understand people's problems? Like, I don't know how, like, counselors work.
Okay, that's a very good question. My approach to counseling, and I see counseling having 3 aspects to it. Again, I'm the type of person that likes to boil it down to bite-sized and understandable concepts. Counseling has 3 concepts. The first one is identification. And what I mean by that is everyone who goes to graduate school or doctorate school comes out to be a licensed counselor or a psychologist. We are trained to do intakes, as we call it, basically to sit down with an individual or with a couple and learn their story, find out why they've come to counseling to begin with, to know what their background is, what it is that's causing dysfunction in their life. So I call that identification. We need to identify, the things that are going on in a person's life. Now, we are all trained to do that, whether we are Christian counselors or non-Christian counselors or non-faith-based. We all have that training for that component. The second one is once we know the story, once we know and identify what's really going on in a person's life, then we try to have what we call a treatment plan. And that treatment plan typically means that we now have to learn how to empower someone with coping skills and to help them overcome something. Again, in graduate school, we are all taught to do that. We learn how to do that, whether it be, again, Christian counselors or non-faith-based counselors. We all learn some techniques to help a person overcome something or to learn some coping skills to help them get to a better place and make better decisions. That's pretty much where most counselors fall, is those 2 components. But there's a third one that I liked to pursue. Now, this third one is usually done and only can be done actually with those who are faith-based or Christian counselors, because we actually don't do this thing. We have to allow God to do it. And that's called healing. I believe very deeply that, once we identify something and once we can implement and empower someone with coping skills that may not have had before, and maybe they can overcome some things, in order for those to have sticking power, there has to be some sort of root that has to be eradicated. The root that drives our dysfunctional behaviors, the root that drives our long-term depression or anxieties. There's always a root to that. And I tend to want to go towards that root, which can be messy, which can be challenging, because a lot of folks, once they have those roots that took place in their lives, it almost becomes a part of who they are. And to go there can be very difficult, not just for the counselor, but obviously for the person. But healing is necessary because it transforms us, and only God can do that. The word salvation, just as an example, we tend to think that once we have salvation, it means that we now have eternal life. That's all true. But the Greek word for salvation means wholeness. So there's a level of salvation that we can experience here as long as we allow God to touch our lives. So that's how I approach counseling in those 3 areas.
Okay.
Is there something in particular you were interested in? If you don't mind, you're live
Does
on
that
air.
help, Sabrina?
But is there?
Well, I was just trying to get over, like, I guess childhood trauma. So that's why I didn't know how to approach it, because I really don't talk much about the stuff that I've been through.
Very common. And let me, can I compare?
Taught just to suppress your problems and deal with it on your own, and
correct.
It just feels like I haven't really got over certain things in my childhood.
Yes, and let me compassionately correct something that you just said. We don't get over that. We have to walk through it. So if someone is trying to tell you, oh, you've got to get over it. Well, first of all, what does that mean? Second of all, how do you do that? Now, let me say it this way. Because when someone says you got to get over it, it's what they usually mean by that is you've got to forget it ever happened. You've got to not even think about it anymore. Oh my gosh, that is so unnatural and unrealistic. This is what can happen. This is what can happen, and this is the reality of things. You can never change history. But, and this is the hope, you can change the impact that history's had on you. So you cannot change what took place when you were a child. No, you can't change that. However, it can be redeemed. It can be placed in a different framework. It can be come out of the darkness that's been haunting you so that you can see it for what it is, and then it begins to lose its power. It can never change history, but it'll lose the power that it's had on you. That's the hope, and that's what can be done in counseling.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, good.
That makes a lot of sense.
Good, yeah. And you think about women who have talked about something similar to what you've experienced, Sabrina. Many times they may go to an event, maybe a women's event of some kind, and they talk about their history of, let's say, being raped. And they talk about it very freely. What that indicates is they know that they cannot change the history, but they're expressing that history as a testimony. But why they can be able to express it so freely is because they want to help other women, meaning it no longer has that impact, that negative aspect over their lives any longer. If you can picture that.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. It did. It really did.
Good.
I do appreciate that.
And if you want to reach out to him, Robert, tell us the best forms of contact, please.
On my website, there is an email address as well as a phone number, www.rbshaw.net.
Okay. Thank you for the call.
.net. N-E-T.
Oh, .net. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Have a great day. Thank you. Great questions there. 631-317-1291. If anyone has any other questions for Robert, please feel free to reach out. 631-317-1291.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Just to add again, to go further with what I just described in those 5 typical areas of mental health, we are, as human beings, we are physical beings, we are mental beings, we are emotional beings, we are spiritual beings, and we are relational beings. All 5 of those exist in every human being. And they always are interactive, whether we realize it or not. And we can have different levels of spirituality. And, again, we're physical beings, emotional, mental, and so on. Now, if one of those areas becomes affected by a negative event, typically those other areas are affected too at varying degrees. One of the ways that can be described is over the last 30 years or so, there has been a tremendous amount of emphasis and studies on the human brain. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. So for example, when we have a traumatic event take place, and we have the ability to try to rise up against it, our physical aspects of our body, what happens in our brain is it releases two hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. And when adrenaline and cortisol gets released because we feel threatened, there's a stressful situation taking place, those hormones cause us to rise to the occasion and to try to do something about it. It's the fight part in us rather than the flight part in us.
Yep.
And
I apologize, we have a caller.
Okay,
do you mind holding that thought? Hi, welcome to the show. You're live on the line with Dr. Shaw. Who's this?
Hi, my name is Patricia.
Hi, Patricia. Please
Hello,
ask
Patricia.
any questions you may have.
Hi. My question is, what books or other resources do you recommend on a regular basis?
On a regular basis, well, that depends on what is being presented. It depends on what the individual may be needing help with. One of the things that usually affects us is our own self-talk. When something goes wrong in our lives, or we have a particular environment in which we grow up, we may hear things. We always have messages that are coming our way as we grow up and as we are developing. Sometimes they are very overt messages, like I love you, you're going to work out just great, or you will never amount to anything. You're always going to make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. Those messages stick to our souls and to our spirits. But there are also messages that are more what we call meta messages, things that are not necessarily said, but are yet conveyed. Sometimes by tone of voice. And this was a few shows ago, we talked about the aspects of communication. So self-talk is a huge, huge issue when it comes to mental health. So one of the books I usually recommend is called Telling Yourself the Truth. And it's written by William Backus, B-A-C-K-U-S. William Backus, Telling Yourself the Truth. That's a very, very helpful book. Another one is a person tries to please everyone. Another common factor in a person's life is that we try to please people so much so that we can avoid things like anxiety, rejection. So we go out of our way to please everyone, but the problem is that it is an impossible endeavor because we will never please everybody. But yet, some people are bent in trying to do that. So there is a very good book called Pleasers by Kevin Lehman, L-E-M-A-N, Christian counselor from upstate New York, who I believe now lives in Arizona. So those are just some aspects. Depending on the situation, there can be several resources.
Are you with us?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. All right. 631-317-1291. We still have 5 minutes left in the show if anyone wants to reach out. In the meantime, I forgot where we left off before the caller came in.
We were talking about
we
were talking about the cortisol and adrenaline.
Yes.
One of the things about cortisol and adrenaline is it's designed to be released at the time of stress and trauma where we can rise up and try to do something about it. If, however, we are constantly living under anxiety and stress, if that's part of how we live, cortisol and adrenaline are being secreted all the time. And it's not designed to do that.
We have a call again. Okay. Sorry. Hi, welcome to the show. You're live on the line with Dr. Shaw. Who's this?
My name is Jessica.
Hi, Jessica. Please ask any questions you may have.
Well, the question I have is, what makes a Christian counselor unique?
What makes them unique? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Good question. Some might think that a Christian counselor only refers to someone who's a pastor. Now, I've served in that role. Now, pastoral counseling is entirely different than clinical counseling, because pastoral counseling deals with the person's soul and their spirit, and they will use scripture and they'll try to encourage them and be focused on what they're doing right now and the future. Clinical counseling can have some of those components, but clinically, what we try to focus on is, well, where a person is at today, and in order for them to get to the future, we do have to deal with some of the things that affected them in their past. Pastoral counseling will not necessarily do that. Clinical counseling can. So, but what makes the Christian counselor in that environment unique is that we would still implement scriptural understanding. And my approach is, I am not one of those types of people that will beat a person over the head with the Bible, because Bible thumping is just not going to be helpful. But the way I look at scripture is, it's a book not only about God, and we tend to miss this part, it's a book about the human condition. And I can spend days upon days talking about that. But it's really a book about the human condition in which God intervenes by his grace. So the human condition, like, for example, Moses had an anger problem. Elijah struggled with depression. Peter was impulsive. Samson was a womanizer. And we can go on and on and on. Everything in the book, none of these people walked on water. Only one person did that. They were humans in broken, natured conditions that God comes in and talks about in the scriptures in order to be redemptive. So what makes us unique is that we focus on the human condition, but we also provide hope, because our spirit, there's a passage that says, it says in Proverbs 18:14, a man can deal with his sickness, but a broken spirit who can bear? Only God can deal with that. Only God can restore and redeem our broken spirits. A man can deal with his sickness a lot of times, but a broken spirit, who can bear? That's a lot different and a lot more difficult to handle.
Definitely.
That help?
Is that helpful, hon?
Oh, okay.
Hello?
We might have lost her. Hi. No, is that okay? Was
that helpful?
Yes, that was very helpful. That was very helpful. I was listening. My
Great.
phone was going in and out a little bit, but
Okay.
I definitely heard what he was saying a little
Good.
bit.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
so
welcome.
much. All right. Appreciate the call. And it's our, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the website. What does the website tell them?
rbshaw.net. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And let's sum up today's show. We have 2 minutes left, sweetheart. So let's get that out.
Okay. Again, focusing on the thing of discussion today was talking about an overview of anger, anxiety, depression, addictions, and trauma, and how those 5 major issues are what usually affects an individual who comes to counseling. And we can address more of that as the shows go on.
Beautiful. And in closing today, how would you like to sum it all up for our listeners?
That we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And when something affects us in one of those 5 areas that exists in us, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, or relational, it usually affects at least 1 or 2 others at the same time. So when we go to counseling, if you're going to counseling, if you're seeking out some help, be reminded that some of those things may be multifaceted that need to be addressed.
Beautifully said. Thank you. And if we do want to reach out to you, pick up a copy of your book, remind us the best forms again.
Through my website, rbshaw.net, there's a tab there from which you can order those books directly by the publisher, and you can also obtain them through Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you again for your time, for being here. And
thank you,
to
Jill.
our callers for reaching
Absolutely.
out today and asking questions. That was awesome. Thank you for your insight. Have a great day. And to all of our listeners, stay tuned.
Hello, my name is Dr. Robert Shaw. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, pastor, university professor, and an author of 6 books dealing with human core longings and how to meet those in healthy ways. If you are struggling with mental health issues, or your organization, or your church, or your group is looking to better integrate meaningful relationships, contact me at rbshaw.net, rbshaw.net, and I will be glad to come and provide a conference, seminar, and speaking engagement to bring people together, to integrate spirituality, relationship building skills, and psychological truths that allow people to have meaningful understandings and meaningful relationships. Thank you.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.